My name is Amina, but everyone in the family used to call me Daddy Ama. Today I am telling you this story myself in my own voice, because people love judging old women without hearing their side. I am 72 years old. My back is bent. My hair is white, but my mind is still awake. This story begins in the same house where I spent 40 years of my life cooking, cleaning, praying, and raising my son with my own hands. My son, Bilal, was once the center of my world. His father died early, and I worked as a school clerk to educate him. Every rupee I earned went into his books, his clothes, his future. When he got married, I welcomed his wife with open arms. I gave them the biggest room, handed over the kitchen, and slowly removed myself from every decision so they could feel independent and respected. At first, everything was peaceful. I woke up early, offered prayers, made tea for everyone, and stayed quiet. But with time, silence became my biggest crime. I did not earn any more. I did not contribute money. I only needed food, medicine, and a little care. That was when the words started floating in the house like poison. Extra mouth. I heard it once, then twice, then often. One evening, my son stood in front of me, avoiding my eyes. He said the house was small, expenses were high, and his wife felt uncomfortable. He said maybe it would be better if I stayed with a distant relative or in an old age home. He said it gently, but his words cut deeper than any slap. I did not cry. I only nodded, because dignity is the last thing an old woman owns. That night, I packed a small bag, 2 saris, my medicines, and my husband's old diary. Before leaving, I looked at the walls. Those walls had heard my prayers, my laughter, and my sacrifices. No one stopped me. No one hugged me. What Bilal did not know was that I had never been foolish with money. Years ago, after my husband's death, I invested my savings quietly. I bought a small share in the very building they were living in, through a legal arrangement under my brother's name. With time, that share became ownership. I never told anyone because a mother does not plan revenge. She plans survival. During those lonely weeks, I learned how invisible an old woman can become. Shopkeepers spoke loudly, neighbors looked through me, and relatives suddenly stayed busy. But invisibility has one gift. You observe. You think. You remember every insult clearly. Aimed every night, not for punishment, but for strength to stand straight again. Patience became my shield, silence became my weapon, and time became my strongest ally. I was old, but I was not finished, and fate was still listening. Every sunrise reminded me that justice walks slowly, but it never forgets addresses. When they sent me away, something inside me changed. Not into hatred, but into clarity. I moved into a small rented room, ate simple food and waited. I contacted my lawyer, completed the paperwork, and transferred the building to my name. Everything was legal, clean, and final. Destiny had its own careful accounting system always. A month later, I sent a notice. Rent was being revised, triple the amount according to market value. Signed by the owner. Me. This is not the end of the story, my children. This is only the beginning. Listen. When the notice reached their hands, the house finally spoke back to them. I was not there to see their faces, but my lawyer described it well. Confusion first, then anger, then fear. The paper was simple, legal language, no emotions attached. It did not say mother, son, or family. It only said tenant and owner. Sometimes law is colder than revenge, and that coldness hurts more. Bilal called me after 3 weeks of silence. His voice was not angry. It was soft, careful, almost respectful. He asked how I was. He asked where I was living. Then, like a trained speaker, he slowly came to the point. He said there must be some mistake. He said his mother could never do this. He said rent had suddenly increased and life was already difficult. Deep, heavy silence. I told him there was no mistake. I told him the building belonged to me now. I told him the rent was revised according to the market. Then I ended the call. That night, memories came back like uninvited guests. His first school uniform. His feverish nights when I stayed awake holding his head. The day I sold my bangles to pay his college fees. A mother never forgets these things, even when her child does. But memory is not meant to chain a woman forever. Sometimes it is meant to remind her of her own worth. His wife came to see me 2 days later. She entered my small room with hesitation, looking around at the cracked walls and thin mattress. For the first time, I saw discomfort in her eyes. She spoke politely, called me Amma, and said they never wanted me to suffer. She said they were stressed, young, and burdened. That word again. It followed me like a shadow. I offered her water. My hands did not shake. I told her suffering is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent respect being taken for granted. I told her I did not raise my son to abandon his mother. I raised him to become strong, not heartless. She tried to explain. I listened. Listening costs nothing, and it often exposes everything. She asked if I could reduce the rent. She said families should not be treated like strangers. I smiled at that. Family. I asked her where family was when I packed my bag alone. Where family was when no one asked if I had eaten. Where family was when an old woman was labelled an extra mouth. She had no answers. Neither did I once. After she left, I sat quietly and prayed. Not for forgiveness, not for punishment. I prayed for balance. Life takes from everyone, sometimes early, sometimes late. But it always takes. The next day, they paid the rent. Triple, on time. Money speaks loudly where emotions fail. Neighbours began whispering. Stories spread fast when an old woman stops crying and starts standing. Some said I was cruel. Some said I was clever. No one said I was wrong. Society does not know what to do with a woman who refuses to disappear quietly. I did not celebrate. There was no victory dance, no happiness, only a calm sense of justice. I used the extra money to fix my health, donate quietly, and live with dignity. I bought a better bed, a warm shawl, small comforts. Independence tastes different at this age. It is simple and peaceful. Bilal stopped calling. I did not chase him. A mother's love does not end, but her begging should. I knew this story was far from over, because when power changes hands, relationships reveal their true shape. And soon, life would ask my son a question he had avoided for too long, the kind of question that cannot be ignored. Listen carefully, because what happened next shook our family forever. After the rent became a routine and silence settled between us, I thought life would move forward quietly. But destiny rarely allows unfinished lessons to rest. One afternoon, my lawyer called and asked me to visit his office. His tone was serious, not urgent, but weighted. Old ears recognize such tones. I wrapped my shawl tightly and went. There, I learned something that surprised even me. The building had been underpaid for years. Market value had risen sharply, and tenants had been enjoying comfort at the cost of the owner's ignorance. Ignorance that once was mine. My lawyer explained that legally, I could either revise contracts properly or sell the building at a very high price. The choice was mine. I walked back slowly, thinking of Bilal as a child, counting coins in my lap, trusting me with everything. Power is strange. When you finally hold it, it forces you to confront who you are, not who wronged you. That night, I could not sleep. Not because of anger, but because of responsibility. Justice without wisdom becomes cruelty, and I had lived long enough to know the difference. A week later, Bilal showed up unannounced. He looked thinner, older. Life had begun charging him interest. He stood at the door quietly, not like a son returning home, but like a visitor asking permission. I let him in. We sat facing each other, a small table between us, filled with years of unsaid words. He finally spoke. He said the pressure was too much. Rent, loans, expectations. He said he felt trapped. I listened again. Listening has always been my strength. Then I asked him something simple. When you asked me to leave, did you feel free? He looked down. That was answer enough. He admitted his mistake. Not fully, not perfectly, but honestly enough. He said society told him parents become burdens. He said fear made him selfish. Fear of poverty. Fear of responsibility. Fear of becoming like his father, tired and helpless. I told him fear explains actions, but it does not excuse them. Then I told him the truth he had avoided. That house was never just bricks. It was built with my youth, my health, my sacrifices. When he removed me from it, he removed himself from its blessing. Money cannot replace that. Silence filled the room again, but this time it was different. It was heavy with understanding. I told him about the building's value. I told him I was considering selling it. His eyes widened. Panic returned. He asked what would happen to them. I said that was the question he once asked about me and found an easy answer. Now life was asking him the same. Before leaving, he asked if I hated him. I laughed softly. Hate requires energy I no longer waste. I told him love does not disappear, but it changes shape. Sometimes it becomes distance, sometimes boundaries, sometimes lessons written in pain. After he left, I made my decision. I would not sell the building immediately. I would restructure everything. Fair rent, clear contracts, no emotions involved. I informed all tenants officially. Some complained, some accepted. All complied. Respect comes when rules are clear. As for Bilal, I gave him a choice. Pay rent like everyone else or move. No special treatment. No mother discount. That was my final condition. Motherhood does not mean lifelong surrender. It means raising someone strong enough to stand without stepping on you. That night, I slept peacefully. For the first time in years, my heart felt light. I had not destroyed my family. I had corrected its imbalance. But balance has consequences, and not everyone accepts them gracefully. What happened next tested not just Bilal, but me as well. Because society does not forgive an old woman who refuses to be weak. And soon, their judgment would knock on my door. Bilal arrived the next morning before sunrise. I knew because I was already awake. Old age brings light sleep and heavy thoughts. When I opened the door, he stood there with folded hands, eyes swollen, pride stripped away by exhaustion. For the first time in many years, he looked like my son again, not a man hiding behind responsibility. We sat on the floor. I did not offer tea immediately. Some conversation should not be diluted with sugar. He spoke slowly, carefully, like each word carried weight. He said he had not slept. He said the house felt heavy since I left. Not empty, heavy. He said his children asked where Daddy went, and he had no answer that did not shame him. Then he did something unexpected. He apologized. Not with excuses, not with blame. Those 3 words are difficult for a son to say, especially in a society that crowns men kings of their homes. I closed my eyes for a moment. Apologies do not erase wounds, but they clean them enough to heal. He admitted that the words extra mouther came from him, not his wife. That truth hit harder than any lie. I nodded. Lies can be forgiven easily. Truth requires digestion. He said fear turned him cruel. Fear of money, of judgment, of becoming small in other people's eyes. I told him fear is a test and he had failed it once. What matters is whether he would learn. He asked if he could move me back home, not as charity, but as family. I took a deep breath. This was the moment everyone imagined I was waiting for, but I was no longer that woman. I told him no. His eyes widened, confused, hurt. I explained gently. Returning would erase the lesson. It would tell life that abandonment has no consequences. I could forgive him, but I would not undo my growth. I told him something important. A mother's love is not proven by how much she tolerates, but by how honestly she teaches. I said we could rebuild our relationship, but not under the same roof. Boundaries are not punishment, they are protection. He cried, quietly. Men rarely cry in front of their mothers, but when they do, it is not weakness. It is surrender. I placed my hand on his head, like I used to when he was sick. Some gestures survive even the worst storms. I told him I was proud of him for coming without pride. Then we talked about practical things, his finances, his stress. I did not offer money. Instead, I offered guidance. We discussed budgets, priorities, and responsibilities. I reminded him that providing for parents is not a burden. It is a mirror of who you are. He listened, truly listened. Before leaving, he asked if I would ever trust him again. Trust is rebuilt slowly, like bones after a fracture. It heals stronger, but only if you do not rush it. He nodded. He left lighter than he arrived, but changed. After he left, I sat alone and felt something unfamiliar. Peace mixed with sadness. Growth always carries grief for the person you used to be. I realized I was no longer just reacting to pain. I was shaping my future. That week, I made a decision for myself. I enrolled in a small community program for senior women. I began teaching basic literacy to women older than me, women who were invisible like I once was. Giving back does not require youth, only purpose. News reached me that Bilal started changing too. He spent more time with his children. He stopped complaining about money and started planning. Pain had taught him what comfort never could. But just when things seemed calm, another storm approached. Not from Bilal, but from within the family. Inheritance, property. Greed has a way of waking sleeping relatives. And soon my door would be knocked by people who smiled the loudest and cared the least. My story was far from over. Because when an old woman gains power, everyone suddenly remembers she exists. The knock came on a Friday afternoon, sharp and impatient. I already knew who it would be. Greed announces itself loudly. When I opened the door, my younger brother's sons stood there, dressed well, smiling too much. Relatives who had not visited me in years suddenly remembered my address. Power has a scent, and everyone smells it eventually. They sat down without invitation, looked around my room like inspectors, and began with polite words. Health, weather, prayers. Then slowly, like thieves testing locks, they moved toward the real topic: property, inheritance, family right. They spoke as if my life was already counted in days, not years. One of them said, "You are old now. Why keep so much responsibility?" I smiled gently. Old age does not remove ownership from a woman, only from society's imagination. I reminded them that I was alive, mentally sound, and legally protected. Silence followed. They did not expect resistance. People rarely do from women with white hair. They suggested I transfer the building for safety. They said men handle such matters better. That sentence told me everything. I asked them where these men were when I was thrown out of my home, when I slept alone in a rented room, when I paid my own bills. Again, no answers. Word spread quickly. Some relatives supported me secretly but stayed silent publicly. Fear travels faster than truth. Others accused me of becoming greedy. I found that amusing. A woman claiming what is hers is always labelled greedy. A man doing the same is called smart. Bilal called me that night, worried. He had heard rumours. He asked if I was okay. For the first time, his concern felt genuine, not reactive. I told him I was fine. I told him something else too. That family does not mean blood alone. It means who stands with you when standing is difficult. The pressure increased. Phone calls, messages, advice I never asked for. People reminded me of death as if I had forgotten. I reminded them that death comes to everyone, but dignity belongs only to those who defend it while alive. One evening, I sat alone and thought deeply. Power can isolate. It can harden the heart if you are not careful. I did not want to become bitter. I wanted balance, so I made another decision. One that surprised everyone, including myself. I created a legal trust. The building would remain mine while I lived. After me, its income would be divided clearly. A portion for Bilal, but with conditions. Responsibility toward elders, education for children, and a portion dedicated permanently to women abandoned by their families. Old women. Invisible women. Women like me. When the documents were finalized, noise turned into shock. Some relatives were furious. Some disappeared. Bilal came to see me again quietly. He read the papers carefully. He did not argue. He only said, "You turned pain into purpose." I nodded. That is the highest form of healing. He asked why I still included him. I told him punishment teaches fear. Accountability teaches growth. I did not want to raise a fearful man. I wanted to raise a better one, even now. After that, peace returned slowly. Not the loud peace of celebrations, but the quiet peace of alignment. I woke up every morning knowing my life had meaning beyond survival. I walked straighter. I breathed easier. People still talked. Let them. Society always talks when women step out of assigned roles. I had lived long enough inside boxes built by others. This chapter of my life belonged to me. But life always saves one final test, just when you think lessons are complete. A test not of strength, but of mercy. And soon, fate would place me in a situation where I would have to choose between justice and compassion. The hardest choice an old woman can face. Listen closely, because what happened next changed how I understood forgiveness forever. The test arrived quietly, without warning, the way real tests always do. One night, near midnight, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Old women learn to protect their peace. But something in my chest tightened, and I answered. It was Bilal's wife. Her voice was shaking, broken into pieces by fear. She said Bilal had collapsed at work. Stress. Blood pressure. The doctor suspected a mild stroke. They were at the hospital. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for favours. She only said, please come. For a moment I sat still. The phone pressed to my ear, my heart suddenly older than my body. This was the moment life had been preparing me for. Justice whispered, he must face consequences. Compassion whispered, he is still your son. Silence followed. And in that silence, I remembered the night he was born, blue and not crying, how I prayed and begged until he finally breathed. I wrapped my shawl and went. At the hospital, machines beeped like impatient clocks. Bilal lay on the bed, pale, smaller than I remembered. Power disappears quickly under hospital lights. His wife stood aside, eyes red, hands trembling. When she saw me, she broke down, not with drama, but with exhaustion. I realized then that pain humbles everyone, sooner or later. I stood near his bed and held his hand. It felt warm, alive. Relief washed over me, followed by anger at myself for doubting. The doctor explained the condition. Not fatal, but serious. Lifestyle, stressor. The same pressure that had turned him cruel had now turned inward. When Bilal opened his eyes and saw me, tears rolled down without permission. He tried to speak. I stopped him. Rest, I said. We will talk later. Mercy does not require speeches. I stayed the whole night. I prayed. I adjusted his blanket. I did not bring up rent, property, or lessons. Hospitals are not classrooms. They are reminders. By morning, he was stable. Outside the ward, his wife held my hands and apologized. Fully, honestly. She said she supported the decision to send me away. She said fear of losing comfort blinded her. I listened. Then I told her something important. A woman's worst enemy is not society. It is fear disguised as practicality. She nodded, crying harder. Truth hurts when it finally fits. Relatives arrived later, suddenly caring, suddenly united. They saw me there and fell silent. No one questioned my presence. Pain rearranges hierarchy. In that moment, I was not an old woman with property. I was a mother, and that role still carried weight. Bilal recovered slowly over the next week. I visited regularly, but returned to my own room each night. Boundaries remained. Mercy does not mean surrender. During one visit, he asked me if I had come because I felt obligated. I answered honestly, I came because I chose to. That is the difference. That is the difference. That answer changed something in him. Gratitude replaced entitlement. He began therapy. He reduced work hours. He started repairing what stress had broken. Healing is not dramatic. It is disciplined. When he was discharged, I helped arrange things quietly. Not money, but structure. I reminded him that strength is built by facing limits, not denying them. He listened. Truly this time, people later said, you proved you are a real mother. I disagreed silently. I had always been real. I simply refused to disappear. Mercy did not weaken my justice, it completed it. That night, alone in my room, I cried for the first time in months. Not from pain, but release. I understood then that forgiveness is not forgetting. It is choosing not to poison yourself while remembering. But life had one more lesson waiting. Because once you show mercy, the world tests whether it was wisdom or weakness, and soon someone would try to take advantage of my compassion, someone who mistook kindness for an open door. And this time, I would respond very differently. Mercy has a dangerous side. When people see it, some feel inspired, others see opportunity. I learned this lesson soon after Bilal returned home from the hospital. He was healing slowly, learning discipline, learning silence. I stayed at a distance, watching, praying. That is when the second type of people arrived. One afternoon, Bilal's wife came to see me again. This time, she brought papers. Her tone was respectful, careful, but nervous. She said the hospital bills were heavy. She said work was uncertain. Then she said something that made my heart sink. She asked if I could temporarily reduce their rent just until things settled. I did not answer immediately. I looked at her face and saw fear again. Real fear. But I also saw something else. Expectation. The old expectation that a mother's mercy has no limits. That compassion means compromise. That kindness bends endlessly. I told her I would think about it. That night, I could not sleep. Not because the decision was difficult, but because it was familiar. I had spent my entire life adjusting, reducing, sacrificing. Every time I did, people called it love. No one called it loss. Mercy without structure becomes self-erasure. I had learned that too late once. I would not repeat it. The next day, I called Bilal and asked him to come alone. When he arrived, I spoke clearly. I told him I would not reduce the rent. His face tightened, but he did not interrupt. That alone showed growth. I explained my reason. I said, if I bend now, you will never fully stand. I did not raise you to lean on your mother forever. He stayed quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Slowly, he said it hurt. but he understood. That was the moment I knew the lesson had finally taken root. Pain with understanding is growth. Pain without it is punishment. What hurt me more was what happened next. Relatives started spreading stories. They said I had changed after getting money. They said I was heartless, calculating, cold. Some even said I was waiting for my son to fail so I could feel powerful. Lies grow faster than truth because they are easier to swallow. One cousin confronted me directly. He said, "If something happens to Bilal again, it will be on your conscience." That sentence was meant to break me. I looked at him calmly and replied, "If something happens, it will be because life is hard, not because I refuse to destroy myself to soften it." He left angry. I stayed peaceful. Weeks passed. Bilal adjusted his life, sold some comforts, changed habits, took responsibility. Slowly, strength returned to him. I watched from afar, proud but quiet. A mother does not need applause. One evening I received a message from a woman I barely knew. She said she had heard about me, about the building, about how I stood alone. She said her mother had been abandoned too, and asked if I could guide her. That message stayed with me. Pain has echoes. Strength becomes direction. I realized my story was no longer just mine. It had become a mirror for others. Women who were afraid to speak. Mothers who were tired of shrinking. Old women who thought invisibility was their destiny. I began meeting them once a week, not to complain, to talk, to share, to remind each other that age does not cancel worth. Slowly, something beautiful formed, community, quiet, strong, unbreakable. Bilal noticed the change in me. One day he said, "You are not just my mother anymore." I smiled. "I never was only that," I replied. He smiled too, not sadly, proudly. But life never lets peace last too long without testing its foundation. Just when everything seemed balanced, an unexpected legal notice arrived at my door. It challenged the ownership of the building itself. Someone had decided to fight me. Not emotionally, legally, and this time, the enemy was not family emotion or social pressure. It was pure greed dressed in legal language, the kind of fight that drains energy, money, and time. I held the notice in my hands and laughed softly. They thought age would make me tired. They had no idea how much strength is born when an old woman has already survived everything else. The legal notice sat on my table like a quiet threat. No shouting, no emotions, just black ink questioning my right to exist where I stood. They claimed irregular transfer, old signatures, technical confusion, words designed to confuse, intimidate, and exhaust. Wears many uniforms, and this one wore a suit. I did not panic. Panic is a luxury of those who have not been cornered before. I had been cornered by life many times. I called my lawyer the same day. His voice was calm, confident. He said the case was weak, but time-consuming. "They want you to give up," he said. "They think you're tired." I smiled. Tired people don't survive abandonment. Tired people don't rebuild themselves at 72. Word spread again, faster than before. Relatives returned, suddenly concerned. Some advised me to settle. "Why fight at this age?" And they asked. Age again, always age. As if breathing past a certain number is an insult. I asked one of them, "At what age does injustice become acceptable?" His face was tight with anger. Not fear, anger. He said someone was trying to steal from me. From us. That word mattered. Us. For the first time, he did not stand between me and trouble. He stood beside me. He offered to handle everything. Lawyers, money, stress. I stopped him gently. I told him this fight was mine. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I needed to finish something I had started long ago. I said, "If you take this from me, you take my final lesson." He understood. Growth had taught him patience. The hearings began. Courtrooms are cold places. Wooden benches, slow fans, tired faces. People assume old women don't belong there. I sat straight, shawl folded neatly, eyes alert. I spoke when needed. I listened carefully. Silence is powerful when it's chosen. The opposing side tried tactics, delays, sympathy stories. Even suggestions of settlement that benefited everyone except me. One man said softly, "Why suffer? Give it up and rest." I replied just as softly, "Rest comes after justice, not before." Weeks turned into months. The case strained energy, but it also sharpened me. I woke early, read documents, asked questions. I refused to be decorative. Every time someone underestimated me, I stood taller. Something unexpected happened during that time. Other tenants began supporting me. They had seen fairness, structure, respect. They wrote statements, they showed up. Power built on justice creates loyalty. Power built on fear creates silence. One day in court, the judge looked directly at me and asked why this property mattered so much to me. I answered honestly, because it represents my life's work, and because letting it be stolen would teach my son that injustice wins when women grow old. The courtroom went quiet. Truth does that. Outside, Bilal hugged me. Not tightly, respectfully. "You're teaching me how to be brave," he said. I replied, "I'm teaching you how not to be afraid of doing right." The pressure increased. Anonymous calls, suggestions, even veiled threats about reputation. I ignored them. Reputation built on silence is fragile. Mine had already been broken once. Nothing left to lose. Then came the turning point. A document surfaced. Old records, proof of clean ownership. The opposing side's case began collapsing. Their confidence cracked. They offered settlement again. Better terms. Quick closure. I declined. Some fights are not about winning faster. They are about finishing properly. As the final hearing approached, I felt calm. Not excited. Calm. I had already won something greater than property. I'd proven to myself that age does not erase authority. That dignity does not expire. That fear does not get the final word. The day before the verdict, Bilal asked me if I was scared. I shook my head. "I've already lived through the worst," I said. "This is just paperwork." But life likes to test calm with surprise. That night I received a visit I never expected, from the very person who had filed the case. Alone. Without lawyers. Without arrogance. He wanted to talk, and I knew whatever he said next would reveal whether this story was ending or transforming into something even bigger. He stood at my door like a man carrying a stone in his chest. The same man who had challenged my ownership, who had signed papers to erase me quietly. Now he looked smaller, uncertain. Power looks different when it stands alone. I invited him in, not because I trusted him, but because fear should never control curiosity. He sat carefully, as if the chair might judge him. He began without greetings. He said the case was failing. He said his partners were angry. He said he wanted a compromise. I listened. I always listen. He offered money. A clean exit. No more court. No more stress. "You can rest," he said again, "like everyone else." I asked him one question. "Why did you think I would give up?" He hesitated, then said the truth. "Because you are old. Because women get tired." There it was. The honest wound. I told him my age had taught me endurance, not weakness. I told him women do not get tired of justice. They get tired of being ignored. He tried another angle. He spoke of family, reputation, peace. Peace is often used to bury the powerless. I told him peace without fairness is only silence with decoration. Then I surprised him. I asked him about his mother. He looked confused. He said she lived with his elder brother. I asked if she was happy. He did not answer. Silence again. I told him this case would follow him longer than any verdict. That stealing from an old woman would teach his children something he could never undo. He softened. Not fully, but enough. He asked what I wanted. I told him I wanted the truth on record and an apology in court. Public. Clear. No settlement hiding the lie. He said that would humiliate him. I replied gently, humiliation fades. Guilt doesn't. He left without agreeing. The next day, court was crowded. Final hearing, I wore a simple white shawl. No jewellery, no drama. I stood when my name was called and felt steady. The opposing lawyer began, then paused. Whispered conversations followed. Papers shuffled. Then something unexpected happened. The man stood up. He withdrew the case. Publicly, he admitted there was no legal claim. He apologised for harassment. His voice shook, but the words were clear. The judge recorded it. The room exhaled. Some faces looked shocked, some embarrassed. I felt nothing explode inside me, only a deep, quiet completion. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered. They asked questions about revenge, money, family. I answered only one. This was never revenge, I said. It was remembrance of my worth. Bilal stood beside me, eyes shining. Not with victory, with pride. He said nothing. He didn't need to. That silence was his apology growing roots. Life slowed after that. The building remained mine. The trust stood firm. The women I met every week grew bolder. Some confronted their families, some found work. Some simply learned to say no. Small revolutions are the strongest. Bilal invited me for dinner one evening. Just dinner, no pressure to move back. No speeches, I went. His children hugged me tightly. A daddy, they said like it was never lost. We ate quietly, normal food, normal laughter. Healing is ordinary when it's real. As I walked back to my room that night, I felt tall. Not because I had one, but because I had chosen myself without losing my heart. That is a difficult balance. Many fail it. I looked at the stars and smiled. Old women are not endings. We are chapters people skip until they need wisdom. My story was still being written, slowly, carefully, with intention. And the next chapter would not be about fighting or proving. It would be about legacy, about what remains when strength softens into guidance. Because when an old woman survives injustice without becoming bitter, she becomes something rare. She becomes a lighthouse, and many would soon find their way because of it.